Welcome. I'm Butch Delaney and I'm glad you're watching this video. Today's lesson is lesson 6 of the series, Reconciling Science and the Bible. In these lessons, we're attempting to find proof that God exists. Today's lesson is asking, could you use simple logic to prove that God exists? The 3 lessons prior to this one have looked at ways people in the past have used different methods to answer that question. We've looked at an ontological proof, or the idea that there is such a thing as truth. We looked at an anthropological proof that God exists, noting that all nations in the world have their own gods, and each of them seems to look like us. Our image of God, of course, is a male being who looks exactly like a human. When God manifested himself on earth, he did come in the form of a man. Tonight, we'll ask, can logic help us in our search for God? I believe logic demands a God that exists. The character Spock, played by Leonard Nimoy, is undoubtedly the poster child for logic. He and Sherlock Holmes top the list of the most logical fictional characters that I know. And logic is all about making correct inferences. It is stating 2 things that are logical and true and making a conclusion that is reasonable and valid. It is this plus therefore that, for example. Here are 2 premises. All cats land on their feet. Kitty is a cat, so let's drop Kitty and see if she lands on her feet. Now that's a valid premise. Not much fun for the cat, though. Buttered toast always lands butter down, and that's another premise. So let's drop a piece of buttered toast to see, and that is a valid premise. But you should never try this. Let's rub some butter on Kitty's back and drop her to see whether she lands butter side down on her back or on her feet. I want you to know, I never tried that. Please don't try it. The Apostle Paul was also one who exhibited valid logic in his own discourse, and we could learn a thing or 2 about logic from Paul. Perhaps the ancient Greeks were most well known for their use of logic. Paul confronted it in his travels. He was in Athens at the Areopagus, the place where logicians gathered for a daily convention, and he reasoned with them. You Grecians have no right to say there are so many gods. There is but one God, and he has made himself known to you, and you have no excuse. Just look at what God has made. If God made the world, then he alone is God. His qualities are eternal and can be seen in the world that he created. You have no excuse but to understand him. Paul is a well-reasoned philosopher. After Greece, he came to Thessalonica, and he also used logic to reason. Living beings demand a living God. We did not come from a god of stone or a god of gold, an object simply created by an artist from imagination. Living beings must have come from a living God. Now that's a valid inference. Thomas Aquinas was a student of Aristotle and attempted to bring his Aristotelian logic into church. It's pretty simple. When I was in debate in college years ago, we all were instructed from day 1 about the use of inferential logic. A lot of it goes all the way back to Aristotle, and it's based on deductions using a syllogism. State something universally accepted. This is your major conclusion. All men are mortal. Then make an inference that must logically follow from this premise. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. It works well with something that falls in a category that is universal. Take color, for instance. Color, by definition, is reflected. White is a color that reflects all other colors. Black is not reflective, hence black is not a color. So here are the 5 logical constructs from Thomas Aquinas that he felt proves that God exists. Logic from motion. You see things in a room at rest. They will stay at rest unless acted upon by an agent who causes them to move. God is the ultimate cause of movement. He is the first mover in the world. Now I watched a few videos of security cameras that scan activities in a room late at night. In the room there are a number of chairs. Suddenly in the video, one of the chairs moves. We see no one in the room. It gives us a chill. The inference here is this: chairs are inanimate objects. Inanimate objects stay at rest until someone or something moves them. When you see a chair move late at night in an empty room, you may get a shiver because of this reality. Then you realize that chairs don't move themselves. So you become suspicious and believe that someone used clear fishing line tied to the leg of the chair and he's off camera pulling the chair. Or you may believe there is such a thing as a poltergeist or a spirit and he is moving the chair. So imagine now the first thing that was created. It would have been stationary. It would have moved if God moved it or if God caused it to move. In the beginning, God created a formless and shapeless world. God hovered over the shapeless mass that was in total darkness. Then God, the first entity mentioned in the Bible, spoke, "Let there be light." And there was light. Therefore, God exists. Aquinas' second is similar to the first. Every effect has a cause. When there are two people living in a house, there's only one degree of freedom. For example, I go into one of our bathrooms and to use the commode. I notice the lid is closed, so I open it, and then I pull up the seat. And when I'm finished using it, I wash my hands and I leave. When I leave, the commode is now in an operating mode and the lid is up. So later, Jen comes in and notices that, and then she chastises me yet again for leaving the commode seat up. She has concluded from this: A, there was a cause for the commode lid being up. B, she knew she did not cause it. Therefore, C, Butch must have done it. Life exists. The absolute first life could not have existed without someone ultimately causing it. God would be that which was the ultimate first cause. Aquinas' third proof looks at nature, and all physical things in the universe exist because they were created. Nothing exists without it being created. Who in the world existed before the universe? God did. The Bible starts with this logic. In the beginning, God created. God is a thing that existed before all creation. God created. God must exist. Aquinas' fourth logical proof, a proof of design. Can there be any question in your mind that things have design? An arrow moves because it was designed to move. It was once a part of a tree, yet when cut from the tree, it is lifeless. It will lay where you drop it until you pick it up. Someone designed it and formed it into an arrow. Still, it will lay in a quiver until someone picks it up and puts it in a bow and shoots it into the air, and then it moves. Everything in the universe has design, and God is the ultimate designer. His fifth and final proof. We understand good, better, and best, but we do so only because there must be an absolute best, and we know that that would be God. Blaise Pascal, we've talked about before. I think this will be the last time his name will be brought up, but he entered the challenge to describe how God must exist. He uses very forthright logic to prove that God must exist. He says, if there's truth, then this is it. And he's not trying to prove that God exists, though. Instead, he's trying to assess if it is better for us to choose to believe or not to choose to believe God's existence. He produced a very simple example to say whether or not you should bet on God's existence. In every single one of us, there is a hole. We seek to fill that hole and things in this world, but nothing seems to satisfy. Forrest Gump got satisfaction just from running, and for a while it filled the hole. Then one day, he just stopped. he finally discovered that running did not fill the hole. Pascal reasoned that ultimately in each of us there is a God-shaped hole that only God can fill. We can try to fill it with other things like money, sex, and rock and roll, but nothing fits. God placed in each one of us a hole that only He can fill. But as I've said before, Pascal was a mathematician, so he turned to math to see if he could see if God exists, or to assess the probability that he does. Say you're visiting a friend and you see this. Probably it looks like it could be your house on fire. What should you do? Would you ignore it and just tend to it later? No, you would leave immediately and rush home to see if it's your house or your neighbor's house and offer help. Being a statistician, Pascal reasoned that you can use probability to assess whether or not you should believe in God. Now, he's not trying to prove that God exists. He's asking you to assess the probabilities of accepting that God exists and acting like it. That's what it all boils down to for Pascal. No one will be able to prove that God exists on this side of death. We can only infer that he does or he does not. However, Pascal is asking, how much are you willing to wager that God exists? Guys, let me give you a heads up. On the next slide, please pick A. You'll find out in a second. So, your wife is ill, bedridden with a physical problem. A big pharma company has a pill that will cure her, and it only has a 50-50 chance to work. You've tried everything else. Now, this new pill that is in a trial period costs a considerable amount of money. What should you do? Is it reasonable to empty your bank account or go into debt even to try to pay for the pill? This is option A, which I'm sure all the guys will agree with. Or are there any of you male numbskulls out there who would say B, wait and see? So what then if someone in the testing department calls and offers you the medicine for free? Remember, it only has a 50-50 chance to work. What should you do? Would it be unreasonable if you chose not to try it? So the math magician that Pascal was attempted to put the decision of making a call that God exists into a math game. Let's go through it. Again, this is not really proving that God exists. Instead, it's a game of chance we're playing to determine how we should act if God exists. Is it logical to bet on God's existence or not? So here's the first scenario. It's a simple coin flip game, heads or tails. In this case, think about God. Heads, he exists. Tails, he does not exist. That is how most people play their lives. I'll bet that I have a 50-50 chance that God does not exist. So I'm going to enjoy my life without any of that religious stuff. In this case, you are betting on your life. Should you play this game? Should you make this bet? Flip a coin for heads or tails. It costs you $1 every time you flip. Then there is a 50-50 chance to win. If you win, you get $3. If you lose, you've lost your $1 buy-in. Pascal here calculates the expected value per flip. If it lands on heads, it costs $1, but you win $3 for a $2 payout. If it lands on tails, you're simply out your $1 buy-in. Should you play? Yes, you should play. The odds are in your favor. The expected value per flip is $2. Again, you're betting on whether or not God exists. Should you bet if the odds are this way? So now there's a rule change. You still pay $1 to play for each flip, but there's a 50-50 chance that you will win. But if you win, you only get $2 instead of $3. Should you play this game? In this case, you probably should not play. The reason is the best you can hope for is break even. It costs $1 to play. You get back your $1 if you put in on average. Win some and lose some. The best you can hope for is break even. In a sense, you're being asked to bet on God. Does he exist or not? If he does and you bet on him, then there are certain benefits. If he does not and you bet on him, then what have you really lost? There are two ways you could live your life like a 50-50 game. Bet that he does, or bet that he does not exist. Betting that he does not exist, at best you have a 50-50 shot at a winning decision if you choose not to believe in him. And if he actually does not exist, you gain nothing. But if he does actually exist, what do you lose? You lose everything. The second way is believing that he does exist. Again, you have a 50-50 shot at losing this decision, but the payout will be much greater if he does exist. You choose to live your life as if he does and act accordingly all the time while you do not know. If you win it all, heaven. If you lose and he does not exist, what have you really lost? Nothing. Now, Christians know in advance, because of the Bible, to bet that he does exist. Betting that he does exist, and he actually does exist, is the best scenario, and that is what we believe. We have a slight insight because of the Bible to make us believe that he actually does exist. So, bet on him. Okay, the choice to play this game is not yours. Pascal says you have to play. You have to bet on God's existence. So what will you wager? Your afterlife? How will you bet? Remember Willy Wonka? In that movie, Charlie used the quarter his granddad gave him to buy a candy bar. Can you remember a day when candy bars cost less than 25 cents? What do they cost today? But that's a different discussion. So he took the quarter and bought himself a candy bar. Naturally, he loses his bet. No winning ticket. So he leaves the store. He knows his decision was a selfish one. He lost half of his money, and he's feeling very bad about it. Then he spies a shiny quarter in a sewer gate. He runs back in. He sees there are 2 bars left, so he buys 1 bar. And before leaving, he turns around and buys the other one to take home to Grandpa. What Charlie does not know, we know this, but he doesn't, is that there are only 2 bars left in the whole world. And he was buying the one with the golden ticket as a certainty. And of course, he gets his golden ticket. There are 2 sets in this equation. First, how you act. You can act as if God exists, or you can act as if he doesn't. Sometimes it seems that life is more enjoyable for those who don't believe in God on this planet. But God really exists, or he does not. There are only 2 choices. Then there's your belief about that. I believe God exists, or I do not. Now, belief in God alone is not enough. You also have to live your life in a way he would approve. This, you can imagine, is what God would want from you. So, what is your bet? If you believe that he exists and he actually does, you're golden. You'll spend an eternity with him in heaven. If you believe he exists and he does not exist, then what have you lost? Nothing. If God does not exist, then neither does hell, so you haven't really lost anything in this bargain. Option C is, if you do not believe and then he turns out to exist, then there will be a big problem for you. You never really investigated the Bible, so you really don't know him. You did not live a life as if he exists, and you are completely at his mercy. This is the worst possible case, because the Bible did warn you that God exists. And finally, option D. If you do not believe and he does exist, then what have you lost? Nothing. So there is only one choice with a positive decision in this whole matrix. Believe and act accordingly that God exists. All the other choices have no payback, or at worst, they have very negative payback. What should you do. Is it reasonable to believe that God exists? Look at all the evidence for his existence. Consider Pascal's argument that within the human there is a God-shaped hole that only God can fill. Then look at the payback. You only get this if he does exist and you live accordingly. All other choices do not stack up. Any other choice other than believing God exists results in no payback at all, or it results in eternal punishment. But if you choose to believe he does not exist, then you may lose it all, or at best, you lose nothing. So, what is the more logical choice for you? According to Pascal, it is for you to believe in God, act as if, and when you die, you will be rewarded. Another way to look at this decision is to treat it with accounting principles. Reduce this decision to one that looks at the utility of the decision. Is it rational to choose a religious life and be a believer in God? How can you ever measure this decision? What will the payout be? Should you even play Pascal's game? You can use decision theory to help you decide for yourself. So we're going to assume Mickey Mouse is planning for a vacation in the mountains. The question he has on his mind is, should I take my snowboard or my skis? And this really comes down to two questions. Will there be fresh snow? And which do I prefer, snowboarding or skiing? If there's fresh snow, the snowboard makes more sense. If there's been and will be no new snow, then the skis make more sense. So one part of the decision rests on the chance of snow. The weather report for Colorado that week says the possibility of snow is a weak one, only 35%. He is shipping his equipment a week in advance, but this is all the information that he has. If there will be fresh snow, the snowboard makes more sense. If there be no fresh snow, then the skis make more sense. But he prefers the snowboard over the skis generally, but he wants to make the right choice given the weather. So first he decides what is the chance for snow, and we know that's 35% that it will and 65% that it won't. At this point, look at the utility of your choices. Your preference for one or the other depends upon whether it snows or not. This is not really a 50-50 choice because you will have the most fun if you'll be on a snowboard when it snows compared to skis. But if it does not snow, you will have the most fun in this case on skis compared to the snowboard. Overall, of course, the best condition would be for fresh snow on a snowboard. Can you look at the decision for whether there is a God or not as a utility decision? Which choice will yield for me the best possible outcome? To bet that God exists and live a life as if he does? And that is the utility in this particular decision. How should I live my life? So building the decision matrix involves looking at a forecast. So what is the likelihood that it will snow? Your best guess is 35% that there will be snow based on a forecast. But there is a 65% chance there will be no snow. So assign points to this decision. Now that you have percentages worked out, you can use the same method to determine whether you should or should not believe in God by looking at the utility of the two choices. Multiply the likelihood that he exists times the utility that you've decided for each condition and arrive at your decision. Believe in God or not believe in God. Should I believe and live a life believing that he exists? Or should I live a life not believing in him and then find out later that he does exist? What have you lost in this case? A chance for eternal life. If you are a Christian, you've already worked through this, even though you may not have recognized it. You've decided to pack your skis based on your belief that God exists. You're guaranteed to have the best payout in this choice. If you're not a Christian, you too have worked through this. You've decided to pack your snowboard, and what you may find is there's no new snow so you are out of luck. In Mickey's case, he's going to have a great weekend of skiing on his skis. Pascal's wager ends like this: God either is or he is not. You cannot reason about this. Nothing you can do can affect this outcome. You're playing a game. Heads you win, tails you lose. Which will you choose? Choose wisely and you gain it all. If you lose nothing. There are two choices. He either does or does not exist, and two effects, either bliss or misery. The only choice with a payback is to believe that he exists and to act accordingly. The best bet you can hope for is that he does not exist, or that he will have mercy on you should you choose not to believe in him and then later find out that he does exist. The proposition, according to Pascal, is infinite. When you are staking your finite life in a game with equal risks of gain or loss, and you have the infinite to gain. Said in other terms, if you bet he exists and he does exist, you have an infinite gain, heaven. If you bet he does not exist and he does exist, you lose nothing. But bet that God exists and he does not, you lose nothing. Bet that God does not exist and he does not, you gain nothing. One final look at Pascal's wager. It's a slant that you could take that may sit better with you. Regardless of any of the profit-loss equations above, think of it this way. If God exists, you're simply better off as a believer. And even if God does not exist, you're still better off as a believer than a non-believer. Here's Pascal's take on it. If you win everything. If you lose nothing, because you extended no effort in any of the other three choices that God exists. Pascal would say, bet on God. So it's time for you to place your bet. What do you wager? Your eternal life. What you win? Heaven.